Vermont's housing shortage has been frequently described and analyzed for many years, and possible solutions advanced. Last month, a new tool was added to the toolbox. A full toolkit, in fact. The Homes for All Toolkit, as it's known, is a handbook and guide for communities to help them develop different housing solutions, with an emphasis on so-called missing middle housing, mostly smaller scale housing units, such as duplexes, triplexes, multi-generational housing, accessory dwelling units, and the like. It's been developed by the state's Department of Housing and Community Development. It helps break down the regulatory and zoning issues builders and developers might face and explores possibilities for infill housing development, using existing lots and spaces where more housing units could be constructed within existing neighborhoods. Last October, a team from the Department of Housing and Community Development, a division of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, stopped by in Arlington to talk with community leaders and residents and to look at several local sites where there might be some examples of potential infill development sites. Arlington was one of several communities the team, led by Amy Tomasso, the Community Planning and Project Manager for the Department of Housing and Community Development, visited as part of this project. One of the sites they looked at during the Arlington visit was one on Andrews Lane in East Arlington, which is featured in the toolkit, which was released online in mid-March. We had a chance to talk with Amy Tomasso again recently, following the release of the Homes for All toolkit, which is available on the Agency of Commerce and Community's website at accd.vermont.gov/Homes for All.
And this is kind of can be an on-ramp for smaller scale developers to just get in the game, get started again. So, but no, the kind of hundreds of units, that range in the past few years across the state, in the missing middle range have kind of come up that we know of. But we're hoping to really, create this catalyst for change through a lot of these resources and trainings, which I can get into like some of the next steps as well. Some changes to the statewide designation programs and especially Act 250 would really help this infill housing. What that could look like is really identifying upfront like the areas where development makes more sense because it's maybe there's existing infrastructure, existing amenities in compact walkable downtowns and villages. So, that's where it might be easier to kind of green light, streamline some of future development, and then create additionally that balanced understanding of where we don't want development to happen. So really like kind of the existing Act 250 process, but just like codifying, the areas that make sense and don't make sense, and then really creating a much easier process to develop, especially what we keep calling the infill housing, like housing on existing lots, that side lot or vacant lot, maybe a house burned down and now there's an opportunity like within existing compact centers. So I am hoping that, legislation addressing that gets passed this year. There are things that can be done at the state level, such as, the Act 250 reform, or like kind of mapping these areas in our villages and downtowns where development could be streamlined. Sure, that's great. But then I think, incentives at the local and regional level are also really beneficial and sometimes even more effective just because, Vermont has these very unique kind of subregions. And so what that could look like, for example, like how South Bend has this set of pre-approved plans. Well, that works really well at the city level because they have, their own zoning bylaws and their own permitting processes. So if regions and municipalities can, do things like maybe streamline the permit process and approval process for certain home types such as duplexes or accessory dwelling units, or like really compile resources of who is building and contracting at this smaller scale with who is also interested in developing and kind of start to create those network opportunities.
Have you seen any pushback coming from any of the towns, or I'm just thinking, the neighbors are going, oh, wait a minute, I like that green field just the way it is. I don't want to
Mhm.
see a house there. Is that, I guess you could call it NIMBYism. Is that been something you've had to deal with?
A little bit, a lot less than I would have actually expected, to be honest. But when we did so in October, and that's how we first met, my team went around to 5 communities across the state to kind of test some of these concepts out and have 5 neighborhood infill walking tours, case study sessions. And so those were community meetings. And the intent was to have these like very open community-wide conversations about how we feel about infill housing. And yeah, that came up a little like, well, I love my backyard, or I wouldn't want another house right there, might be too dense. And one, I think it's healthy to have those conversations up front. That's why the toolkit visualizes what, an extra house or 3 unit, multifamily home might look like on that side lot. And then it's up to the community to really balance like, well, what is the housing need? And how is the community maybe changing in other ways that might be more detrimental than having an extra home on a lot, such as like restaurants closing or grocery stores limiting hours, things like that. Like what outweighs maybe like the spatial and aesthetic gains of having, the wide open backyard. And that's not something I can answer. That's up to each community, and the toolkit is maybe a guide in assisting that process. And hopefully then inspiration to maybe take the next steps forward. But overall, there's been overwhelming support for this project. I think it's because it resonates with people. Like it makes sense. This isn't a top-down proposal of a 40-unit housing apartment building or something in a village. It's like, what are the existing conditions in the village, and how can um, 1, 2, like 10 homes fit in across a larger area so that it's not such a imposition or drastic change. And then this is how our housing developed like very organically in villages and downtowns. So it's not so different than when you look at, our original organic settlement patterns. It was made of like small multifamily or kind of cottage cluster accessory dwelling unit home types.
After talking with Amy Tomasso, we also met up with Nick Zayas, the town administrator of Arlington, for a follow-up on how this might impact Arlington's progress on creating more missing middle housing.
So the core of what's going to be necessary to really facilitate infill housing in Arlington is going to be completion of the ongoing wastewater study that is getting close to the 50% mark and should be done by the end of the year. So bar regulatory delay up at the state level in reviewing these things, we certainly hope to have some idea of what our wastewater capacity is both in East Arlington and in Central Arlington, and that is going to dictate what kind of infill housing can really be built, because that neighborhood infill toolbox does note that wastewater capacity is absolutely the core of pretty much all of these projects. And some of them are in towns that have existing wastewater capacity, and some like ours are in towns that are currently exploring wastewater capacity.
So, do you see potential for this concept to kind of really help make a dent in the housing shortage situation here in Arlington and also elsewhere around the state?
I think it was really helpful that Rep. Bongartz and his colleagues in the legislature got the bills passed that made it so if there is municipal water and sewer, which is the places that really this toolbox is trying to address, are going to be able to build this housing by right without needless obstructionism by people who simply don't want to deal with transitional growth issues of some construction noise when things are being built, but once things are done, they're going to have some really great housing for people and also some really great grand list for the municipalities that can really benefit from those new property taxpayers. So it is a win-win for everyone, but certainly having the state take the lead on this and set a standard that is the minimum for properties that really are affected by this infill housing need was a big step for all of us. So we're really happy with that, and the table is set. It's on the municipalities to deliver the water and sewer investments that'll make infill housing really successful.
Much work remains to be done to create enough housing for all who need it, at affordable price ranges. But the missing middle, homes for all, infill housing approach would seem like one that would be part of the bigger overall answer to Vermont's housing crisis. For the GNAT-TV News Project, I'm Andrew McKeever.